We learn how Abraham Lincoln is this great man and did great things. However, never completely taught his philosophy nor his policies exemplifying his ideologies. As an American, you hear Party of Lincoln over and over again, but nobody actually asked the question, how are you the Party of Lincoln? I'm going to skip all the little nuances of establishment of policies and just dive into what the major parties were running on during Lincoln's elections and compare them to the modern day parties. Prior to each presidential election, the participating parties get together in their respective national conventions. Modern conventions are just a week of blowing up establishment egos and sucking everyone off. I digress. At these conventions, especially prior to radio and television, the parties established the policies they would like to accomplish with an election victory. In 1860, the Republican Party was formed after President James Buchanan's ineptitude in office during the previous 4 years, particularly satisfying the question of slavery in the expanding country. Might be a subject of a later video. The Republican Party stated its establishment to seek a peaceful and permanent solution. The party believed the principles within the Declaration of Independence and embodied in the Constitution are essential to the preservation of our Republican institutions. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Within the Republican platform, they believe the Constitution, rights of states, and the Union must and will be preserved. The party also denounced any calls for disunion, along with stating the Union is the reason for success of the entire country. Continuing through their platform, the party insists states' rights continue to be maintained without outside influence nor military intervention from other states. The platform goes on to state that the previous administration abused its power, forcing pro-slavery constitution on Kansas, and responsible spending must occur by not allowing fraud and corruption to favored partisans. They believe the opulence within the federal government must be reined in. I see this as moving to eliminate unnecessary spending within the federal government for non-essential things. The Republican Party of 1860 felt it to be a dangerous precedent within legislature for the judiciary to be subversive to peace because of the dogma the Constitution carries slavery into any and all territories. They state the normal condition of all territories freedom and maintaining no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Legislation must keep this in mind and deny any federal, state, or individuals to give legal existence to slavery in any territory in the United States. The platform continues to address slave trade under a United States flag as a crime against humanity and calls for Congress to ensure the final suppression of traffic promptly. They saw the Democratic election to allow slavery into all future established territory should be the model, absent to veto by federally established governors. Also, they call for Kansas to be admitted as a state. They touch on tariffs to be established strategically to encourage domestic industrial interests and open to adjustments. They encourage policy for good wages for working people, high agricultural prices to boost commercial prosperity and independence. They state the opposition to selling public lands if settlers hold those lands. They seek not to change any laws about foreign citizens and give full rights for all classes of citizens. They call for an improvement in marine infrastructure and a protection of citizens' lives and property. They also believe the federal government should fund a transcontinental railroad, and they invite all citizens even if they don't agree on all things. In contrast, the 1860 Democratic Party platform avoided the issues the Republican Party addressed. The Democratic Party agrees on ample and complete protection of all citizens home and abroad, native or foreign-born. They also agree the Transcontinental Railroad needs to be built. However, unsurprisingly, they differ on much more. The Democratic platform states they would adhere to the Supreme Court ruling on slavery in territories. They also believe Cuba should be added to the United States on just terms from Spain. The Democratic platform calls any lack of enforcement by the states to the fugitive slave law, which required slaves to be returned to their owners, is hostile, subversive to the Constitution, and revolutionary in effect. Before comparing to modern policies, probably a good idea to see what platforms the parties ran on during Lincoln's second presidential election run. Keep in mind the election occurred during the Civil War. The incumbent Republican Party began their 1864 platform stating the highest priority is to preserve the Union, quelling the rebellion at all costs. They follow up with no compromise with the rebels. The 1864 Republican platform goes on to state slavery was the cause of the rebellion, and the party is in favor of a constitutional amendment to eradicate the practice. The party also wants to ensure all soldiers permanent recognition for their services and provisions provided any disabilities and wounds. The party also states an endorsement for Lincoln and his policies throughout the presidency to preserve the Union. They also endorse the Emancipation Proclamation and employing black soldiers. They also put unity to be of the utmost importance to peace and harmony. They also wish to ensure equal treatment within the military regardless of skin color, particularly the treatment of POWs, who also must be treated equally well. Immigration should be welcomed and encouraged with liberal and open policy because foreign immigration has added to the country's wealth, resources, and power. The Republican Party also wished a speedy construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, and public debt must be paid, and recommended responsible expenses and a vigorous and just taxation system. All the states must use national currency, and states the United States cannot be neutral to European attempts to overthrow independent governments. As you can see, the party stays mostly consistent within the previous election's goals. In contrast, the Democratic Party pretty much attempts Southern apologia and reactionary politics. Their first piece of their agenda states the party will adhere to the Union under the Constitution as a strong foundation and framework for the government. Within this bullet point, they also state the government will be equally conducive to welfare and prosperity for all states, North and South. They go on to complain the Constitution has been disregarded during the wartime and immediately give cessation of hostilities to get peace. The Democratic Party's next point discusses grievances about the military interfering with the elections held in Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, and Delaware. They state those actions were unconstitutional and future similar actions would be seen as revolutionary and resisted by all means under Democratic control. Dems continue to state they would preserve the Union by fighting unconstitutional actions by the administration, as well as violations of civil rights. They focus on the denial of citizens the right to bear arms as a calculated move to prevent the restoration of the Union and continuing a power-hungry government at the consent of the governed. The Democratic Party states the administration does not respect and treat citizens that are POW. They finish by saying all soldiers of the Army and Navy will receive all the care, protection, and regard they have earned. They do have a caveat that this will only occur if the Army and Navy attain power, implying the Union would fold under the Confederacy. So much for ensuring the preservation of the Union. As most of us know, after the 1860 election, states began seceding from the Union. Nowadays, people argue the war was fought for states' rights. You should follow up with these people with a simple question. What exactly were they fighting for the state's right to do? It's ultimately one of the list of many bad faith talking points from this period in history. Why don't we look at what the reasons the states gave in their secession letters? Good news, I read them so you don't have to. Well, if you don't want to. South Carolina's Declaration of Secession, dated December 20th, 1860, claims hostilities to states' rights have been occurring over time at an increasing rate. They compare their actions to the Revolution and stress free and independent states. Apparently, freedom of slaves isn't included. Also, they claim these states have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, and establish commerce, as well as all other things which independent states may right to do. They continue the comparison to the Revolution and claim the states that did not ratify the Constitution yet were independent states. South Carolina complains hostility towards slavery has been increasing and the party coming to power believes slavery to be becoming extinct. This is its stated reason for secession. They argue the guarantees of the Constitution will no longer exist and equal rights of the states will be lost. They also claim the federal government will become the enemy because the states will no longer be able to self-govern or protect itself. On January 9th, 1861, Mississippi was way more straightforward. The start of the second paragraph states, our position thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world. They go on to claim black people can only work in the sun and it's a law of nature. Mississippi drones on that a blow to slavery is a blow to commerce and civilization and had no choice but to take action. They go on to cry about the South not getting any slave lands from territories acquired from France and Mexico. They continued to state refusal of expansion of slavery violates the original equality of the South. Side note here, are they not aware the Three-Fifths Compromise in the Bill of Rights was the original equality? They want to count black people when it benefits them politically, but consider them property otherwise. Within this, they're feigning care for slaves, claiming better conditions will not be provided to freed slaves than in bondage. Ah yes, because being imprisoned is better than being free. Mississippi tries claiming to stay in the Union would lead to loss of property, once again disregarding the humanity of slaves and referring to black people as property. They finish by stating the American Revolution was fought for much less than Mississippi's cause. In Georgia's letter from January 29th, 1861, the state straight up admits they were risk averse to any kind of change. They proclaim the party of Lincoln, the Republicans, are anti-slavery and in control of the federal government. Their third paragraph claims the current northern states had always been anti-slavery since the formation of the country. They state grievances that the North's prosperity relied on the federal government and the South got no support from the government to get their prosperity. It's funny, they fail to mention anywhere within their letter their lack of labor costs as being the reason for their prosperity. It's easy to prosper when you're not paying the workers who are actually creating the value for you. Georgia further states the North is profit-seeking at the expense of agricultural interests and profit seekers sought naval protection for trade. Georgia continues to complain about the government funding lighthouse buoys and the maintenance of them. Yes, they forgot about the cotton they were growing being shipped to Europe and using these services. All this can be summarized by Georgia claiming the North is conspiring to destroy Southern agricultural economy. Kind of a ridiculous take considering the raw material for manufacturing likely came out of the South as well as the food being grown there. Much of the rest of the letter are complaints about Northerners consistently voting against the expansion of slavery and the lack of enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. The letter throws a lot of shit at the wall and hopes something sticks to justify secession. In reality, Georgia is just saying the controlling party is anti-slavery. We don't like the results, so you. Virginia's secession was dated April 17, 1861. They claimed the federal government perverted its powers, injuring the people of Virginia and oppressing southern slaveholding states, citing the American Revolution as well to justify their action. Virginia claims all laws which were federally passed will be repealed. Texas's secession occurred on February 2, 1862. Texas spoke about being an independent nation and joining the Union with the institution of slavery. I plan to do a video about Texas admittance to the United States and how it was kind of done in a hurry. Texas continues to talk about the federal government not protecting territories from Indian savages and Mexican banditos DT. They claimed the federal government needed to reimburse Texas's expenses for Texas providing forces to protect. Further along, Texas complains about Northern ideology of abolition, political equalities of races, and the determination to free all slaves. Texas goes on to complain about the slavery ideology becoming a minority in Congress. They also claim the higher law that the Constitution and the laws of the federal union are silly. They're complaining about human rights here. They go on some unhinged rant about a conspiracy to ruin slaveholding states supported by the northern states. We hold as undeniable truths the governments of various states and of Confederacy itself were established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, that the African race had no agency in their establishment, and that they were rightfully held and regarded as an inferior and dependent race. In that condition, only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial or tolerable. Holy white supremacist Batman. They're speaking about human beings, just like you and I. The original document emphasized in this free government, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights. They go on to make the argument that slavery is beneficial to the slaves and free population and justified by the almighty creator recognized by all Christian nations. Hate to break it to you, Texas. Britain was a Christian country and they abolished slavery about 30 years before this letter. They further claim chaos will ensue between the races without slavery. They believe Texas can either be isolated within the North or unite its destinies with the South. So we've looked at the policies the parties wish to implement if they won. We obviously know Lincoln did come out victorious. We just reviewed the secession letters where it's fairly obvious slavery was the reason with some pretty incoherent arguments. What did Mr. Lincoln want to do with his victory? Towards the end of his first year as president, Lincoln addressed Congress on December 3rd, 1861. In his speech, he addressed his rebels' goal was for foreign countries to assist the rebellion to restore commerce. He states that would involve foreign countries disregarding moral, social, and treaty obligations. The commerce he is talking about is primarily cotton. Instead, he thinks foreign countries should assist in squashing the rebellion to restart commerce. After that, Lincoln speaks about some boring but important government stuff. He requests approval for a railroad from North Carolina to Tennessee to Kentucky. Lincoln speaks on negotiated treaties which will be submitted to the Senate, as well as seeking permission to negotiate treaties with Haiti and Liberia. He would not agree to any treaties without congressional approval and requests speediness. Further along, he states the Supreme Court should have a convenient number of justices corresponding to the number of circuits. He also requests careful review of the statutes to ease enforcement. He thinks laws should be as plain and intelligible as possible. Wrapping up this video's discussion on the boring government functions, Lincoln asked for the creation of the Department of Agriculture. Now we get to an interesting part of Lincoln's speech. Abraham Lincoln took time out of his speech to dispel an overused argument. He proclaims there is an effort to place capital equivalent or above labor within government. He goes on to say it's assumed labor is available only in connection to capital. However, he points out nobody labors unless somebody else who somehow owns capital, basically saying the person that owns capital got lucky. That person induces the other person to labor. Labor is either hired willingly, such as hired laborers, or unwillingly, such as slaves. He continues his line of thinking. There's no relation between labor and capital. There's no such thing as a free man being fixed for life in the condition of hired labor. Both assumptions are false, and any inferences based on these faulty assumptions are groundless. He goes on to say, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and would never have existed if labor not first existed. Lincoln admits capital has rights worthy of protection as any other rights, and he acknowledges the mutual benefits between labor and capital. The next portion of his speech speaks to Lincoln's philosophy on his view of a successful economy. He begins with some background information and stating there are only a few owning capital that hire labor or hire labor to hire labor. Think like Mander. He points out there are large swaths of the North and South that neither hire nor are hiring labor. Family farmers work the land themselves with help from capital. These farmers are mixed class because they sometimes hire labor. Lincoln is basically acknowledging the small businesses of the time. After laying this groundwork, Lincoln paints his viewpoint of the economy and how it should run. He speaks that beginners are hired. These workers learn on the job as well as save for tools and land. These former beginners are now the masters of their trade and hire beginners themselves to continue the cycle. He professes the most trustworthy men are those who toil up from poverty. These people are not inclined to take which they have not earned. Abraham Lincoln warns these laborers must beware of giving up political power, or they will surrender their ability in advancement and affix new disabilities and burdens upon them till all liberty shall be lost. Wow. That sentence seems to be incredibly linked to labor advocacy around the world. Ensuring labor rightfully retains the value which it creates and honestly earns. Unlike capital, who exploits its higher labor and steals the value through excess profit. Where have I heard those arguments before? Oh yes, person who wrote the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx. Marx was such a fan of Abraham Lincoln, it is common knowledge Marx wrote Lincoln a letter. It's unknown if Lincoln ever responded. And now, how does Lincoln's philosophy and policies compare to the modern United States policy? Well, first, both parties deny Marxist ideology. One party fiercely decries Marxism, mostly misattributing it as a form of fear-mongering. That party is the Republican Party, which bores the name of the party Lincoln had a hand in creating in the first place. Fortunately, that's about the only thing in common between Lincoln's Republican Party and the modern Republican Party. Modern-day Republicans seem to constantly praise CEOs of companies, where one can argue likely haven't earned their way up the ladder. All right, when I say this, I mean they didn't work their way all the way up the company hierarchy, outside of the administrative portion of the company. Lincoln explicitly states in his first address to Congress, the most trustworthy are those who toil up from poverty. These people are not inclined to take which they have not earned. Well, let's see how Republicans treat those who are impoverished. Well, how about those who labor together and gather together to get what they've earned and maintain power?
Sir, this is a time, this is a place. You want to run your mouth? We can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Is that your solution every
Oh, no, sit down.
Fire,
Sit down.
okay.
You're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
Those don't really seem to align with the values of Lincoln. Okay, detractors will say that was one speech. There's no way Lincoln would put decades of observations and whatever political experience he may have had into a speech to Congress to explain the philosophy he will govern and expects to govern during his time as president. For those that have a hard time with sarcasm. Of course, the speech was well thought out and was fleshed out from Lincoln's view of the world. You don't believe me? All right, let's look at some of the things Lincoln passed as he was president. Lincoln signed the Revenue Act of 1861, which was the first income tax within the United States. The law created a 3% tax on income greater than $800, which is the equivalent of $26,100 in today's money. He also signed the Legal Tender Act, issuing $150 million in greenback. This is similar to modern stimulus packages, where more money is printed. The Revenue Act of 1862 created the first national inheritance tax, progressive taxation, and the Commission of Internal Revenue. This Commission of Internal Revenue has become the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS. Another Revenue Act was passed in 1864. This law was a compromise between the progressive taxation and the flat tax policy. This act also raised taxes on business. The modern Republican Party currently parades its Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which did cut taxes for pretty much everyone, especially the wealthiest individuals. However, most individual tax breaks will expire in 2025. The corporate tax was made a permanent flat tax at 21% rather than the previous progressive taxation from 15 to 39%. Interesting, the modern Republican Party made the tax cuts permanent for the corporations, who only gain their value from labor. Lincoln outright speaks against favoring capital over labor in his first address to Congress and states labor is superior to capital. On top of Lincoln's policy accomplishments, Lincoln was insistent in a letter from 1855 he did not identify with the Know Nothing Party. The Know Nothing Party was an anti-immigration party who sometimes referred to themselves as the Native American Party. Not those Native Americans. I am not a know-nothing, that is certain. How could I? How could anyone who abhors the oppression of Negroes be in favor of degrading classes of white people? Our progress in degeneracy appears to me to be pretty rapid. As a nation, we begin by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created equal, except Negroes. When the know-nothings get control, it'll be read, all men are created equal, except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I should prefer immigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. To Russia. For instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy. Looking at the Republican Party's platforms in 1860 and 1864, it is fairly obvious Lincoln and his party were not anti-immigrant. Well, to me, it appears the party of Lincoln doesn't exactly have much in common with Abraham Lincoln's actual policies. Combined with the fact that the current Republican Party consistently empathizes with the Confederacy, with the defense of its flag, the justifications of slavery, and the revisionist history on the reason for secession. Trust me, the modern Democratic Party doesn't exactly practice Lincoln's policies either. They don't exactly help the impoverished. They're currently trying to pass a bill that was originally proposed by the anti-immigration party, the Republican Party. They've also sided with capital over labor on many occasions. However, they have moved more towards labor in this recent iteration. Doing the deep dive for this video has definitely given me more of an appreciation for Abraham Lincoln and his values, as well as longing for what could have been. This longing for what could have been extends through other people whose lives were cut short. I'll likely create videos for them in the future. Examples include FDR, JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Robert F. Kennedy, John Brown, and many others. Overall, both major parties are not really anywhere near Abraham Lincoln's ideals, but one party uses his name and wholly represents much of what Lincoln was against.